The Israelite campaign in Canaan begins with a regional conflict in the central hill country. After making a treaty with the city of Gibeon, the Israelites are immediately pulled into a defensive war when a coalition of 5 Canaanite kings attacks their new allies. Joshua responds with a massive counterattack. He marches his army all night from their camp at Gilgal, arriving suddenly and throwing the 5-king coalition into a blind panic. But the text emphasizes that the decisive blow does not come from the Israelite army. The narrative describes a sudden, catastrophic hailstorm sent directly by God, dropping massive hailstones onto the fleeing Canaanite forces. The author includes a highly specific detail in verse 11. These hailstones cause more enemy casualties than the Israelite swords. By this metric, the physical battle is effectively over. Immediately following this grounded military report, the narrative shifts entirely in verses 12 and 13. Joshua speaks to the Lord and seemingly commands the sun to stand still over Gibeon and the moon to halt in the valley of Ayalon. This places a physical meteorological event, a hailstorm, right next to a cosmological impossibility, a suspended sun. We have to determine how the original author intended us to read these two events occurring back-to-back in the exact same chapter. For over a century, literalist readers have tried to validate this textual anomaly by searching for astronomical proof. In the 19th century, an urban legend circulated claiming that astronomers at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England, were doing orbital calculations and discovered a missing 24 hours in historical time. By the 1960s, this exact same myth mutated. The new version claimed that scientists operating early mainframe computers for NASA spaceflight trajectories had their machines grind to a halt because the software detected that same missing day. Physicists point out that calculating a missing day retrospectively is scientifically impossible without a prior fixed reference point in time to measure against. You cannot find a missing day in the past simply by running an orbital equation backward. These attempts fail because they ignore the hermeneutics of genre. This is the foundational interpretive principle that requires a reader to identify a text's specific literary category, like historical prose or legal code, or even poetry, before evaluating its factual claims. Trying to prove a cosmological anomaly with modern astrophysics commits a category error. It forces an ancient text to answer scientific questions it was never designed to address. This diagram builds a comparative matrix to help us identify the literary patterns in ancient Hebrew texts. We will use 3 columns to trace how these authors recorded historical events. In our first column, we look at the Red Sea crossing in Exodus chapter 14. The author provides a sequence of factual prose. A strong wind blows all night, the sea parts, and the Israelites cross on dry ground. But the very next chapter, Exodus 15, covers the exact same event using a different literary form. This is the Song of the Sea, recorded as structured poetry. The poem uses highly figurative language, stating that Pharaoh's officers were cast into the sea and went down into the depths like a stone, sinking like lead in the mighty waters. If we read this strictly as physical prose, we hit a logical contradiction. A retreating army cannot physically sink into the depths of a sea if the preceding chapter explicitly established they were walking on a dry seabed. The poem functions as a hymnic reflection. It is an emotive, artistic celebration of the victory, designed to praise God, not a literal description meant to override the historical facts of the prose. We can test this pattern by moving to the center column of our matrix to examine the book of Judges. Judges chapter 4 reads like a bare-bones military report. It details a terrestrial battle where the Canaanite general Sisera is routed by the Israelites under the command of Deborah and Barak. Then, in Judges chapter 5, the text immediately shifts to the poetic song of Deborah and Barak. In verse 20, the poem makes a massive cosmic claim. It states that from heaven the stars fought, altering their courses to wage war against Sisera. No one searches for the astronomical records of stars breaking their orbits to fire upon Canaanite soldiers in the Levant. We intuitively accept that fighting stars is a poetic metaphor. It represents the idea that the total divine forces of nature were aligned against the enemy. The Hebrew authors routinely used cosmic imagery to elevate the significance of a terrestrial victory. Now we apply this literary matrix to the anomaly in our third column, Joshua chapter 10. Verses 1 through 11 operate exactly like the prose in Exodus 14 and Judges 4. They provide a literal, factual account of a sudden military rout and the resulting hailstorm. Then we hit the abrupt shift in verses 12 and 13. Modern critical Bibles print these specific verses as an indented poem. The author is actually quoting an external text called the Book of Joshua. The Book of Joshua is an ancient, lost collection of heroic Hebrew poetry, referenced only one other time in the Bible. The grammar inside the poem reveals that God is the one commanding the elements. He continues his role as the primary warrior who threw the enemy into a panic and cast down the hailstones in the preceding prose. This perfectly mirrors our control cases. The sun standing still operates identically to the stars fighting from heaven against Sisera. The suspended sun is a hymnic reflection. It is a poetic expression describing an overwhelmingly complete victory, intentionally embedded by the author right into the middle of the historical narrative. Poetry is not the only specialized literary device we have to navigate in the conquest narratives. Following the poetic insert, verses 40 through 42 provide a macroscopic summary of the entire southern campaign, detailing the defeat of 7 specific Canaanite cities. The author employs absolute, unyielding language to describe the aftermath, stating that Joshua left none remaining and destroyed everything that breathed. This map of southern Canaan highlights a massive textual contradiction when we turn to Joshua chapter 13. The later text explicitly states that very much land and many surviving populations remain to be possessed in these exact same regions. This absolute language is known as a historiographical formula. A historiographical formula is a standard rhetorical device used throughout the ancient Near East, where a claim of total annihilation is used to symbolize a decisive political victory, not a literal demographic genocide. The author of Joshua is not contradicting himself. He is utilizing a universally understood ancient formula to summarize the theological totality of the triumph, while the later chapters record the specific, limited reality on the ground. Textual analysis reveals 3 distinct architectural layers in Joshua 10, a historical core detailing the battle, an inserted hymnic reflection about the sun, and a sweeping rhetorical summary of the campaign. Treating the Bible as ancient literature often causes anxiety. There's a fear that reading poetically erases the miraculous reality of the text. Proper exegesis actually protects the text. By recognizing the poem, we focus on the real, physical miracle of the hailstorm that God used to deliver Israel, rather than inventing convoluted scientific defenses for cosmological claims the authors never intended to make. To take the biblical text seriously means we must read it exactly as the ancient authors wrote it. We have to calibrate our modern eyes to the rich, multi-layered architecture of ancient Hebrew literature.